Separate matter continues on one way or the other.
Exactly, Lester. And as you say, that's a separate matter that grew out of this probe and was handed to New York because Michael Cohen initially sat down with Bob Mueller's investigators, the president's former lawyer, and as they found things that they thought went outside of this investigation, which has always been about three things: the attempted collusion or conspiracy around the election, any crimes arising out of that, what people have heard about as obstruction, and then this additional authority that Bob Mueller got to go into Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's former campaign chair, and look at his activities, which was authorized. Anything else they hand back out. So as you say, the president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who's reporting to prison, and anything else in that probe continues in New York. The Roger Stone case continues in Washington. But what we have here in this news site that America's been waiting for is what appears to be, in Bob Mueller's view, the resolution of his ambit, of his case, of what he was looking at: election-related conspiracy, known as collusion, and the crimes arising out of it, the obstruction. And so if he found things that weren't chargeable, but he thinks Bob Barr should know about, they could be in that report. We don't know at this hour whether what he's handed in tonight, breaking news moments ago, is a few pages or 50 pages, or as some former reports in previous investigations have been, hundreds of pages.
And just to catch folks up who may be tuning in, the headline of the hour here is that the Mueller report is finished. It has been, under law, delivered formally to the Attorney General's office. We want to go right now to former CIA Director at NBC News intelligence analyst John Brennan. John, this ultimately was a national security investigation to the extent it really centered on Russian interference in the election. Are you afraid that politics may gloss over some of the important indictments in this case so far?
Well, unfortunately, I think politics has taken over the whole discussion over the last 2+ years. I think we as Americans need to be quite concerned about foreign interference in our elections, and I'm hoping that the government is going to do some things that will address some of those shortcomings that allow some of those foreign actors and others to try to shape our electoral landscape. So I'm glad that Bob Mueller was able to carry out his mandate. We are now moving to the next phase. As Ari says, what we know now is that his work has been completed, but he's probably handed off a fair number of investigative threads to U.S. attorneys. Now I think it's going to really be up to William Barr, who I trust is going to do the right thing in terms of sharing with the Congress what he needs to, but also trying to make sure that the American people are going to have as much insight and transparency into this, given that it has consumed the national narrative over the last 2+ years.
And it's important to know that Mueller has done his job here at a time battered by a hurricane of politics and criticism and slings and arrows. Pick whatever you want. Is this a good day for U.S. justice, no matter how this plays out?
I think it certainly is. I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Bob Mueller. And despite what might be said about Bob Mueller by Donald Trump, Bob Mueller has carried out his responsibilities, I think, with tremendous professionalism, and he has kept a tight hold over the information. And so I think what we now need to be prepared to do is to accept his findings and to move on so that we can, in fact, address the issues that I think most Americans are concerned about.
Let me go, if I can, back to Pete Williams right now, just to get a little bit more about the timeline of how things work. So the Attorney General has a clock begun ticking to the point that he has to offer some of these findings to Congress, or is that open-ended?
It's open-ended. There is no requirement in the special counsel rules on how soon the Attorney General has to tell Congress what Mueller's report says. But he has submitted, it's a one-page letter that William Barr, the Attorney General, submitted to the chairman and ranking members of the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. And he says, I may be in a position to share with you, that means those 4 people, to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. Now, let me explain what that means. What he's saying is, it's what we just talked about earlier, Lester, that what the special counsel rules say is that when Mueller submits his report to Barr, he will report on what cases he prosecuted and what cases he declined to prosecute. Well, let me just read you this paragraph. He says, the special counsel has submitted to me today a, quote, now he's quoting from the rules, a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions, meaning the cases he didn't prosecute, that he has reached as required by, and then he cites the rule. I am reviewing the report and anticipate that I may be in a position to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. That's a very small category of information. That's just what is in the rules about cases Mueller decided to prosecute and not prosecute. But then the Attorney General goes on to say, separately, in other words, beyond that, I intend to consult with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Special Counsel Mueller to determine what other information from the report can be released to Congress and the public consistent with the law, including the special counsel regulations and the department's long-standing practices and policies. I remain committed to as much transparency as possible, and I will keep you informed of the status of my review. So that's consistent with, as you recall, what Barr said during his confirmation hearing in January, that he feels if he's going to follow the rules and follow the law, he's hemmed in here about how much he can share, because the Justice Department policies generally say you don't release publicly people who were investigated but not charged. Having said all that, he says, I want to give you as much information as I can, and I'll get back to you on that, but he does not set a date for that, Lester. He doesn't say when he'll get back to tell Congress what more he can tell them beyond the bare facts of who Mueller decided to prosecute, which we already know, and who he declined to prosecute.
All right, Pete, we want to go back to the White House now. Kristen Welker, I understand we're hearing from the president's legal team.
We are. Let me read you the statement. This is from Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, counselors to the president, who say this, Lester. We're pleased that the Office of Special Counsel has delivered its report to the Attorney General pursuant to the regulations. Attorney General Barr will determine the appropriate next steps. Now, I can tell you that this response has been planned for some time, as they have been playing the waiting game right along with the rest of us. They were anticipating that the report would be released imminently, and so here again is the statement. What's going to happen now? Again, they're going to have to wait and see how much, if any, of this report they are able to review. We do know that they had a counter report prepared, Lester, but they're not sure that they're going to release that. Will they release it in their entirety? They'll have to wait and see. But again, the statement right now from the president's legal team is that they are pleased that this step has been taken. Again, no other issue has loomed larger over this president. No other issue has roiled him more than this special counsel investigation. So now they wait to see how much of the report, along with the rest of us, they're able to actually review, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thank you. The president, of course, not in the White House. He traveled to Florida earlier today. Kelly O'Donnell is down there right now. Kelly, what are you hearing from there?
And Lester, the president's press secretary is also traveling with him in Florida, and Sarah Sanders has just tweeted, the next steps are up to Attorney General Barr, and we look forward to the process taking its course. The White House has not received or been briefed on the special counsel's report. So Kristen was telling us about the president's personal lawyers. That is the statement from the White House. The president is here at his Mar-a-Lago resort for the weekend, where he today met with Caribbean leaders. But tonight, perhaps a coincidence of timing, the Palm Beach County Republican Party is holding its Lincoln Day dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and among those speaking is Lindsey Graham, who is the Senate Judiciary Chairman, one of those four individuals that Pete Williams has been explaining would potentially get a briefing, sort of the first look about what was in the Mueller report, what has been transmitted to the Attorney General. On the president's public schedule, there's no indication that he is to attend this dinner, but again, it is being held at Mar-a-Lago, and one could see a scenario where if the president feels good about these initial reports, that he might want to be among Republicans gathered at a fundraiser on his own property, or certainly in the company of Lindsey Graham, who might be able to advise the president on potential next steps or confer with him in some way. We've seen how Lindsey Graham has become such a close confidant of the president. Again, the president's scheduled to be here in Florida through much of the weekend. Lester?
Kelly O'Donnell, thanks very much. I want to go to Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson at our Washington Bureau. And Hallie, the mantra from the president for months and months has been there's no collusion. Yeah. It's a witch hunt. Have they telegraphed what the next mantra is going to be now in this waiting period where we try to find out what's in this.
Yeah, likely, Lester, from what we have been hearing from our sources and based on our reporting, the White House will continue that mantra, essentially. Expect them to try to find whatever sliver of hope they can, essentially, to seize on this report if it stops short. And again, we don't know what is in the actual report itself, but if it stops short of any legal liabilities for the president, it will be framed and it will be talked about from the White House perspective as essentially a victory and as vindication. I can tell you that at this point, we know the campaign, for example, has already been fundraising off of this Mueller report. Expect this to be a political talking point for the president. It is important here to draw a line now between any legal liabilities and the political liabilities from the president, because now the conversation here in Washington is turning to what is in this report and when will we get to see it? How much of it will Americans get to see? You have now over on Capitol Hill the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner, just in the last couple of moments calling for as much of the report to be released to the rest of the country publicly as possible. There are parts that people don't get to see because, for example, it involves grand jury information or classified information. And Senator Warner, among other Democrats, to be sure, want to make sure that the report in full is transmitted over to Congress so that lawmakers can see it as well. Bill Barr has said he committed to lawmakers that he wanted transparency, but he would not commit to releasing the full report when he was in his confirmation hearing. And the president has said he wants Americans to be able to see it, but he said it is up to his attorney general to decide when and how much to be able to release to the public. And just to take a beat and step back here, remember, Robert Mueller, right, was appointed in May of 2017, just several months into the Trump administration. It came on the heels of an incredibly chaotic time inside the Trump administration after the firing of former FBI Director James Comey. There had been a series of personnel changes. The president was feeling under pressure after, of course, the departure of his former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, who has been caught up in this, that triggering many of these steps. Now here we are 675 days later. The president has railed against Robert Mueller from nearly the very beginning. He has been frustrated. It has triggered the president to send, for example, tweets at times lashing out at not just the special counsel, but people in that orbit as well. It is a significant milestone in this administration, the end of the special counsel's investigation and the handing over of the report from Robert Mueller to Bill Barr. We can't emphasize enough, we still don't know what's in it, but it is significant that it is possible that as early as this weekend, lawmakers may get a chance, or at least Bill Barr may be able to talk about what he has seen, share it with the White House, because at this point, the White House hasn't seen it yet, Lester.
Yeah, you're referring to that letter that the Attorney General sent to congressional leaders and said, I may be in a position to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. Ari Melber is back. You've had a look at that letter. What else stands out?
Yeah, there are three big headlines here as we process the breaking news that Bob Mueller has finished his 22-month probe. He has filed his report with the Justice Department. The three headlines, as I see it now that we've gotten some time with the information, is number one, Attorney General Bill Barr says the Justice Department never had to override anything big that Bob Mueller wanted to do. That's significant, especially when we think about all the times that there were concerns about pressure or the White House potentially interceding. That applies not only to Barr's tenure, but the previous people overseeing Bob Mueller, which was Rod Rosenstein, and, as we know, Jeff Sessions had recused. There was a gentleman named Mr. Whitaker that people may remember who was briefly in charge. So that's a big headline. And that is basically the Justice Department saying, with Bob Mueller's stamp of approval, that he was never interfered with in a way that resulted in a change to what he wanted to do. For example, who he wanted to search or who he wanted to charge. That's number one. Number two, Lester, as our colleagues have been emphasizing, and I don't think we can emphasize this enough because we are in fairly unusual territory. Number two is Mr. Barr just told the country he may have further information for Congress as soon as this weekend. And if he gives that information on Saturday or Sunday to Democrats in the Congress, I think it's a fair bet they may want to share it themselves or give their views on it. So we are now in for a fast-paced weekend if Mr. Barr is right, or Bill Barr is right, and we're going to see Congress learn key information. That's about who he charged and who he didn't. We do know who he charged. So it's who he didn't that could be very interesting depending on how that information is shared. For example, presidential family members who were investigated and cleared, or somewhat cleared. Number three is the longest term, which is Mr. Barr is also saying that he is going to do this process going forward. The Mueller probe now is effectively over. but he says he will consult with Mueller and Rosenstein about any other additional information. Our colleague Pete Williams was explaining that they don't have to release a lot under the rules. This is Mr. Barr saying they might go beyond the rules with Mueller's input and potentially release other information in the future period. That's beyond this weekend, and he didn't put a timeline on that.
Because a little will require a lot more. If you had just leaks from members of Congress with their individual spin on it, it only raises more questions.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people who have strong feelings about this. People who've been caught up in the investigation, people at the White House, people with political views, people with concerns about things that may not be illegal, but implicate the national security interests of the United States. This was, as many have pointed out, also a counterintelligence probe. So I think it's very interesting. Another observation I'll make, and this goes beyond exactly what we know, but my interpretation is it seems that Mr. Barr is going out of his way here to emphasize that he is really in concert with Mr. Mueller. We're not seeing a rollout here that suggests any tension. He has used the rules to dictate and state to Congress and now to the world that they didn't have a disagreement about who to charge, which goes a long way towards the public faith and integrity in this process. And now he's saying, I'm going to keep Mueller involved. Again, he doesn't have to. Mueller finished his report. He handed it in. He's saying, I'm going to keep Mueller involved in this other longer-term process of what else we could release later.
And for a document that remains unseen by virtually everyone except the Attorney General and the Mueller team, it is drawing a tremendous amount of reaction. Sudden impact, I think, is a fair characterization. Kelly O'Donnell in Florida with the president at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate, and Democrats are weighing in. Kelly.
Democrats are saying swift transparency is what they want to see now. After waiting for the end point in the Mueller investigation, one of them, Mark Warner, who is a senator of Virginia, who is the ranking member on the Senate Intelligence Committee, he and Richard Burr of North Carolina have worked together in doing their own investigation and have been praised for their bipartisanship. Mark Warner is saying in a statement that Attorney General Barr should craft a declassified version of this report as soon as possible and release it to the public. He goes on to say any attempt by the Trump administration to cover up the results of this investigation into Russia's attack on our democracy would be unacceptable. We're hearing from other Democrats as well who want to now point the pressure on the Attorney General to say, look at what has been included, find a way to sift it into a form that can be consumed by the public. And as you have been talking about in your conversation, it's one thing for lawmakers who have clearances to read this, but is there a form, since the public has paid for it tens of millions of dollars, how quickly can the results, to whatever extent, be known? Democrats are calling for that. The president has largely said he wants the Mueller report to be public too, and during his confirmation hearing, we remember that William Barr was saying he supported the idea of making public as much as would be possible. One area, for example, that typically is never made public are the findings within a grand jury. I'll leave to Ari to decipher all the legal issues there, but the message from Democrats is get it out fast and get it out as completely as possible to the voters who paid for it. Lester?
Kelly O'Donnell, thank you. And Danny Savalas is a criminal defense attorney and an NBC News consultant. We have an understanding of what the law says about all this, but in practicality, is there a timeline that you could suggest as how this is going to all play out, Danny?
There is no timeline, but it's important to understand that the report in its form that was submitted today is something we likely will never see, but we can guess at its contents, and it really comes down to three different categories: prosecution decisions and non-prosecution decisions, which is divided into two categories: people that did bad things but not enough to prosecute them, and then maybe people who really didn't do anything wrong at all. We already know largely who was prosecuted because of the speaking indictments in this during the course of this investigation. We're looking at some of them now. So many folks indicted and so much detail included. Mueller has been dropping crumbs the entire time. So at least as to those who have been prosecuted, we have a sense, at least, who those are. It's the real question ultimately is who did bad things but not quite enough, not to reach probable cause such that they should be indicted. From here, the real report is going to be the Barr report. The regulations only require a notification to Congress, but those are a floor, not a maximum, not a ceiling. Barr can go beyond that, and subject to two huge limitations, grand jury materials, which have to remain secret, and also counterintelligence type materials or classified materials. Those should remain secret because counterintelligence investigation goes on maybe for a long, long time from here. That's a totally separate area.
Yeah, this is a more of a
For a long, long time from here. That's a totally separate area.
Yeah, this is a more of a political question than a legal one, but I think the two come together here. There may be some Democrats who still want to impeach this president. They're looking at that report with the thought that we need to know what's in there in its entirety. How are those two things reconciled?
It's very important that the commission of a crime is neither a necessary nor a sufficient ground for an impeachment. So even if there is a crime, for example, something committed long before the president took office, that may not be an impeachable crime. And yet, if there was some abuse of power that really wasn't even within the purview of the Mueller investigation, Congress can consider that too as an impeachable offense. So the Mueller report doesn't speak directly to the standards, the traditional standards for impeachment, but it will inform Congress, and Congress will have some, particularly the House, who accuses in any impeachment, will have some very difficult decisions to make.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Hallie Jackson right now. I understand we're hearing from members of Congress.
We are from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Lester, as well as Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer, releasing a joint statement just in the last 20 seconds or so, and essentially saying that now that the special counsel has submitted his report to the Attorney General, it is imperative that the Attorney General provide the full report, its underlying documentation, and its findings to Congress. And I want to read you some of this because I think, Lester, this is going to be where you will see Democrats beating the drum over the next several days or several weeks here. Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer say Attorney General Barr must not give President Trump, his lawyers, or his staff any sneak preview of the special counsel's finding or evidence, and the White House must not be allowed to interfere in decisions about what parts of those findings or evidence are made public. The two of them end their statement by saying that the American people have a right to truth and that the watchword, they say, is transparency. Expect to hear that from Democrats over the next several days, Lester, as Nancy Pelosi sort of sets the bar, sets the tone for what she wants her caucus to be focused on here, making sure that people can see what Robert Mueller had to say, see those findings, and then those, listen, shots fired over at the White House saying, hey, don't share this information inappropriately with the White House counsel's office. We should note, Lester, that while the president is in Mar-a-Lago right now, where Kelly O'Donnell is, our colleague there at our White House unit, he is surrounded by a number of his top aides, not just Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, the Deputy Press Secretary as well, but also his White House counsel, his acting Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. It's interesting that his counsel is there. Pat Cipollini doesn't often travel on these trips, particularly down to South Florida, but it was our indication earlier in the day, Lester, that the White House was in a protective posture, having a feeling, as did much of Washington, that in fact this news would happen today. Lester?
Yeah, there you see on the screen the tally of the Mueller investigation over these 22 months. Let's go back to Kristen Welker at the White House. Kristen, the level of anticipation the last few days has been nothing like many of us experienced. We've seen it certainly in our newsroom. I can only imagine what it was like at the White House today waiting for this.
Well, the anticipation was building and growing throughout the day, with reporters huddling with officials here, officials huddling in meetings, trying to determine what exactly was going to happen. And I just want to underscore something that Sarah Sanders said, which is that they have not been briefed on this. So essentially, we were told, and some of the officials here were alerted really just moments before we were. I want to go back to some of the discussion that you were just having about how much of this report will be released. One of the big concerns here inside the White House, Lester, I can tell you based on my conversations, not only today, but over the past several days and weeks, is that there will be information that's released that's damaging about an individual who hasn't necessarily been charged with a crime. So if in fact Barr does decide to release some of the information, you can bet that the White House will try to be very careful about what specifically is released, and they'll try to have a say in that undoubtedly, because that is a concern here for the administration. It does come come against the backdrop of talk of impeachment within the Democratic Party. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that it's way too early for that. She is not in favor of impeachment. And remember, she kept urging her caucus to hold off on that type of discussion until this report was out. And so that sort of raises the stakes as we have this discussion about just how much of this report will be released. This becomes a campaign issue, Lester, for President Trump. Again, we've heard him frequently lash out at the special counsel. You can expect him to do that on the campaign trail. And don't forget, the investigations are growing on Capitol Hill, even as this one has now wound down, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Let me turn to Ari Melber, and I know you've got a broadcast on MSNBC you have to leave, so I want to get your final thoughts on this. And with the thought that the American people have been on edge about this now for 22 months. The virtually entire presidency has been on edge over this. We understand the rules of this, but will there be a preponderance of a feeling that Americans have to know what's in this?
I think there's overwhelming interest, and you see the Attorney General in his concise letter alluding to that, which he did also discuss under oath at his confirmation hearing, that they would look to transparency given these special issues, and that he will consult with Bob Mueller and Rod Rosenstein in the time ahead about how do you release that. As mentioned, there are certain things like grand jury material where you need a judge to even get into that, but there are other things that will be judgment calls. I think the public will be extraordinarily interested not only in the conclusions, which is ultimately the 37 indictments we know about and whatever else Congress learns about that might be negative or that affects America, but beyond the conclusions, it's the details, the evidence, the reasoning. Sometimes it has felt like America has been going through law school together as we pore over these details and try to learn about and have faith in our system. If there's a positive silver lining to some of this, and we don't know all the details yet, one silver lining is if Attorney General Barr's letter is correct, and we don't have reason at this hour to think it's not, and Bob Mueller can speak for himself, it is a great headline for America tonight that Bob Mueller was never overruled by the Justice Department, that the system worked even as he proceeded on sensitive and, yes, highly politicized investigations given the climate, and he was allowed to do his work. And that when he indicted people, including a campaign chair of a major candidate and a lawyer of a sitting president and other individuals, that work continued. That's a part of the system that's working tonight, even as we all wait to see what evidence is in the report and how does it come out.
All right, Barry, thank you, and have a good broadcast. Kelly O'Donnell remains in Florida with the president, who is at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate, and you're hearing more reaction, Kelly.
Well, from the top Republican in Congress, Mitch McConnell, who is at times a outspoken ally of the president and times a more muted one, McConnell putting out a statement saying that he welcomes the news that the Attorney General has received the report from the special counsel, but particularly notable, he says many Republicans have long believed that Russia poses a significant threat to American interests. I hope the special counsel's report will help inform and improve our efforts to protect our democracy. Think of that in contrast to the president often talking about a hoax or a witch hunt. Here you have the top Republican in the Senate affirming the idea that American democracy is under threat or attack from Russia by name. The Mitch McConnell also goes on to say that he is hopeful, much like Democrats are, of a speedy and transparent release of the report in whatever form is possible. So you may have a rare moment of some unity coming from Democrats and Republicans who now say, as the nation exhales after this very long process, what part can be made known? Can all of it be made known? All to be determined. But what is notable is the top Republican is not saying, thank you very much, Mr. Mueller, let's close the file. He's also speaking for more transparency.
Yeah, and notable that all the responses on both sides of the aisle have been measured, but also notable to talk about the fact that we don't know anything of what's in this document. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you. Jeremy Bash is a veteran of the Obama administration and a national security analyst for NBC News. And Jeremy, this ultimately was about Russian meddling in the American election. Have we moved a step closer to dealing with this threat through this special counsel investigation?
Well, Lester, I think we need to think about this in two phases. Phase one was the special counsel's investigation. Phase two is really going to be a congressional investigation into what leverage does an adversary nation, the Russian Federation, have over our president, over the presidency, and ultimately over American foreign policy. Because from the lens of the national interest, That's the most important question. Yes, it's important to know who broke the law and who might go to prison, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, what I think Congress and the American people are going to be focused on with respect to Donald Trump is, can we trust him? Can we trust him to lead the country in a crisis? Can we trust him to look out for the best interests of the United States? And that's a question I think only Congress can answer through this phase 2 of the investigation.
All right, Jeremy Bash, good to have you along as well. Thank you. So Robert Mueller's nearly 2-year investigation is now complete. His report has been submitted to the Attorney General, and the next chapter of this extraordinary story now begins. What will we learn and when regarding Mueller's findings, and what direction the many other investigations will take remains to be seen. We'll, of course, continue to follow this closely. A lot of moving parts here. We'll be talking about them when I see you shortly on NBC Nightly News. And, of course, you can always follow on the NBC News app. For now, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, New York. Good day.
Needless to say, it is a big day. The time is 5:40 on a Friday afternoon, and the long-awaited, after almost 2 years of investigating, the Mueller report has been released. It is now in the Attorney General's hands. During the news there, as we were hearing information coming out of pretty much Washington, New York, and Mar-a-Lago, I've been in contact with Senator Lindsey Graham's office, Jeff Duncan's office, Tim Scott's office, even Senator Tom Tillis's office. No statements have been released yet from our lawmakers, but needless to say, we should be hearing from all of them very soon.
And we will, of course, keep you updated when we do. And we do not know yet when the Attorney General will tell Congress what the report says or how much he will say. We will stay on top of this, keep you updated, and again, much more ahead on WIFF News 4 at 6 and NBC Nightly News. I want to turn now to some of our news here at home.
Yeah, Commitment 2019 in Greenville County. It's the final